Sham Sharadavo Nalalida Loka Tranaya Karuna Gana Ganatam Sham Sharadavo Nalalida Loka Tranaya Karuna Gana Ganatam Praptasa Kalyana Gunanavasya Bande Gurashi Charanara Vrindam Praptasa Kalyana Gunanavasya Bande Gurashi Charanara Vrindam Bande Gurashi Charanara Vrindam Bande Gurashi Charanara Vrindam Bande Gurashi Charanara Vrindam Bande Gurashi Charanara Mahaprabhu Kirtana Nitya Gita Vaditra Madhyam Manasura Sena Mahaprabhu Kirtan Vaditra Romanchakam Pasru Taranga Bhaju Bande Garashi Charanara Vrindam Romanchakam Bande Garashi Charanara Shri Vigrahara Dana Nityanana Shringaratanama Niramajanado Shri Vigrahara Dana Nityanana Shringaratanama Niramajanado Juktasya Bhaktamsa Niyunjatopi Vande Gurashi Charanara Vrindam Juktasya Niyunjatopi Chaturvidha Shri Bhagavat Prasada Satvana Triptan Hari Bhakta Sangha Chaturvidha Shri Bhagavat Prasada Satvana Triptan Hari Bhakta Kritva Tripte Vajata Shadeva Vande Gurashi Charanara Vrindam Vajata Shadeva Vande Gurashi Charanara Shiradikama Bhavayara Para Madhura Lila Gunarupa Namna Shri Radhikama Bhavayara Para Madhura Gunarupa Namna Pratikshana Swa Dhanalalupasya Bande Gurashi Charanara Vrindam Pratikshana Dhanalalupasya Nekunja Yuno Ratikeri Siddhai Jajali Virjukti Apekshaneya Nekunja Yuno Ratikeri Siddhai Jajali Virjukti Tatrati Daksha Ativalabhasya Vande Gurashi Charanara Vrindam Sakshadharitena Shamasta Shashri Ruktastatthava Vyataiva Sarvi Shashri Kintu Prabharja Priyaeva Tasya Bande Gorashi Charanara Vrindam Priyaeva Tasya Yasya Prasada Bhagavat Prasada Yasya Prasadam Nagati Kutapi Yasya Prasadam Bhagavat Prasadam Yasya Prasadam Jayam Stuvam Tasya Yasatri Sandhyam Vande Guru Shri Charanara Vrindam Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namaste Sarasvate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shonavadi Pachatadesha Tarine Namaste Sarasvati Deve Gauravani Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Shri Chaitanya Nityananda Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Shri Krishna Prabhu Nityananda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare 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 Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hariyaraye Namah Krishna Jadavaye Namah, Jadavaye Madhavaya Keshavaya Namah, Gopal Govindaram Shri Madhusudan, Giridhari Gopinath Madana Mohan, Shri Chaitanya Nityananda Shri Advaita Sita, Hari Guru Vaishnava Bhagavata Gita, Shri Rupa Sanatan Vataraguna, Shri Jiva Gopala Bhatta Dasaraguna. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Shri Radha, Nila Madhava Radhe, Jayo Jagannatha Jayo Baladeva Jayo Subhadrama Jayo Sudarshan Chakra. Jaya Sitaram Jayo Sitaram Sitaram Jayo Lakshman Hanuman. Nitai Gora Haribo 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 Nitai Go Haribo Haribo Nitai Gora Pramanande Haribo Jai Vishwapara Paramisa Prabhajakacharya Suttara Sarasya Mahajivan Grace अभचरमिन भक्ति वेदांत स्वामी महाराज श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय। इस्कॉन प्रतिष्ठा विभूति सांस्थापक चर वैष्णव शिरोमणि पतित पावन शील प्रभुपाद जी महाराज की जय। श्री गौर्य गुरु वर्ग पतित उद्धार की जय। श्री रूप सनातन भक्त रघुनाथ सुजीव गोपाल भक्त दास गुण सद्गोस्वामी प्रभु की जय। नामाचार्य शील हरिदास ठाकुर जी की जय। अनंत गुरु वैष्णव की जय। प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवसरि गौर भक्तवृंद की जय। जय परम दयाल श्री नित्यानंद प्रभु की जय। जय प्रेम नाम संकीर्तन के जनक प्रेम पुरुषोत्तम श्री सच्चिदानंद श्रीमन गौरांग चैतन्य महाप्रभु गौर हरि महावृणावतार की जय। गोलोकेर प्रमधान हरि नाम संकीर्तन जय की जय। युग धर्म हरे कृष्ण महामंत्र की जय। बृहद नितांग ट्रांसलेंटल बुक डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन सेवा की जय। श्री श्री राधा कृष्णा गोप राधा कुंड समकुंड गिरिराज गोवर्धन की जय। श्री वृंदावन मथुरा धाम की जय। श्री श्री राधा माधव की जय। श्री मायापुर चक्र धाम की जय। परम करुण श्री गौर निताय की जय। श्री पुरुषोत्तम क्षेत्र जगन्नाथपुरी धाम की जय। श्री जगन्नाथ बलदेव प्रभु देवी सुदर्शन चक्र भगवान की जय। भक्ति सर्व विघ्न विनाशना कनिष्ठ हरे भगवान की जय। गंगा माय जमुना माय की जय। तुलसी महारानी वृंद देवी भक्ति देवी की जय। श्री मथुरा दारानी की जय। समवेत भक्त वृंद की जय। निताय गौर हरि प्रमानंद हरि बोल। All glory to the assembly bodies, all glory to the assembly bodies, all glory to the assembly bodies, all glory to Shri Guru Shri Guru. Sing a prayer.
Namaste Narasimhaya.
Namaste Narasimhaya.
Namaste Narasimhaya. Namaste Narasimhaya. Dalad lad daine. Dalad daine. Hiranyakashi Purvakshaha. Hiranyakashi Purvakshaha. Ilatanga Nakalae. Ilatanga. Thank you. Ito Narsimha Parato Narsimha Tarato Narsimha Yato Yato Yamitato Narsimha Yato Yamitato Narsimha Bahir Narsimha Hriday Narsimha Bahir Narsimha Hriday Narsimha Narasimha Madim Sharanam Prapade Narasimha Madim Sharanam Prapade Tavakar Kamala Bare Nakham Adbhuta Singha Kalita Hiranyakashipu Tanu Bringamara Keshavadhita Narahari Rupa Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Tavakara Kamala Re Nakham Adhuta Singha Dalita Hiranyakashipu Kanubringa Keshavadhita Narahari Rupa Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Keshavadvita Narahari Rupa Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Keshavadvita Narahari Rupa Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Jaya Narsimhadev 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 Jaya Narsimhadev Jaya Narsimhadev 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 Jaya Narsimhadev Jaya Prahlad Maharaj Prahlad Maharaj Prahlad Maharaj Jaya Prahlad Maharaj Jaya Prahlad Maharaj Prahlad Maharaj Prahlad Maharaj Jaya Prahlad Maharaj Jaya Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Jaya Gurudev 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 Jaya Jaya Gurudev Jaya Jaya नरसिंहदेव भगवान की जय भक्त प्रहलाद महाराज की जय श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय
Vishnu Bhakti Pradede Satavata Jai Shrimati Tulasi Maharani Vrinda Devi Ki
कृष्णा प्रेयासी नमो नमः। नमो नमः तुलसी कृष्णा प्रेयासी नमो नमः। राधा कृष्णा सेवा पावो ए अभिलाषी। राधा कृष्णा सेवा पावो ए अभिलाषी। जितो मारा शरण लो तारा वंच पूरन हो। कृपा कोरी करो तारे वृंदावन वासी। मोराए अभिलाष विलास कुंज दियो वास। नयने हरिवो सदा जुगल रूपरासी। निवेदाना धारो साखीर अनुगाता कोरो। सेवा अधिकारा दिए कोरो निज दासी। दीना कृष्ण दासे कोए न मोरा होए। श्री राधा गोविंदा प्रेमे सदाए न भासी। श्री राधा गोविंदा प्रेमे सदाए न भासी। यानि कानि च पापानि ब्रह्माहत्यादिकानि च तानि तानि प्रणाशन्ति प्रदक्षिण पदे पदे। यानि कानि च पापानि ब्रह्माहत्यादिकानि च तानि तानि प्रणाशन्ति प्रदक्षिणा पदे पदे। यानि कानि च पापानि ब्रह्माहत्यादिकानि च तानि 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 प्रणाशन्ति प्रदक्षिणा पदे पदे Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Jaya Tulsi Maharani Jaya Tulsi Maharani Jaya Tulsi Maharani Jaya Tulsi Maharani Jaya Vrinda Devi Jaya Vrinda Devi Jaya Vrinda Devi Jaya Vrinda Devi Nityai Gaura Hari Bol Hari Bol Hari Bol Nityai Gaura Hari Bol Nityai Gaura Hari Bol Hari Bol Hari Bol Nityai Gaura Hari Bol Srimati Tulsi Maharani Vrinda Devi ki Jai
Bhakti Prade Shrimati Tulsi Maharani Vrinda Devi ki Jai. O Tulsi, beloved Krishna, I bow before you again and again. My desire to return the service of Shri Radha Krishna. Whoever takes shelter of you as wish is fulfilled, bestow your mercy upon him, you may give me resident of Vrindavan. My desire is that you also give me a residence in pleasure groves of Shri Vrindavan Dham. Thus within my vision I will always behold the beautiful pastimes of Radha and Krishna. I beg you to make me a follower of Kavadams of Raj. Please give me the privilege of devotional service and make me honored servant. This very fallen and lowly servant of Krishna praise. May I always fame and love Shri Radha Govind. Shri Mati Tulsi Maharani Vrinda Devi ki Jai. Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Shri Shastakam ki Jai. Chito Darpanam Majan Bhava Mahadava Nirvapanam Sheyakari Vachandika Vitaranam Vidyavadu Jivanam Anandam Burivardhanam Padipadam Purnamrita Shradanam Sarvatmasnam Paramparam Vijayati Shri Krishna Sankirtanam Nam Namakari Vaudha Ida Sarva Shakti Natrapita Niyamita Shmaranakala Idarusi Tava Kripaya Bhagavan Mamati Durthaiva Midrisham Ya Janina Nuraga Trinadapi Sunichena Tarorapi Sashnuna Amani Namanadena Kirtaniya Sadahari Nadhanam Najanam Nasundarim Kavitam Raja Gadisakamaye Mama Janmani Janmanishwari Bhavatar Bhakti Rahituki Tvai Ainandatanuja Kinkaram Paritamam Visame Bhavam Buddho Kripaya Tava Pada Pankaja Stitaduli Sadrisham Vichintaya Nayanam Galorashru Dharaya Vadanam Gadu Gadarudaya Gira Pulakari Chitam Vapukada Tavanama Grahane Bhavisyati Jugaitam Nimishena Chakrusha Prabhusaitam Shunya Itam Jagata Sarvam Govinda Virahiname Aslishabhapadaratam Pinastamam Adarshanaar Marmahatam Karotuva Jata Tathava Vidadatu Lampoto Matpranatastu Saivana Para Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Sikhastakam Ki Jai Namo Mahavarannaya Krishna Prema Pradayati Krishna Krishna Chaitanya Namine Gaura Tvishi Glory to the Shri Krishna Sankirtana, which cleanses the heart of all the dust accumulated for years and extinguishes the fire of conditional life of repeated birth and death. This Sankirtan moment is the prime benediction for humanity at large, because it spreads the rays of the benediction moon. It is the life of all transcendental knowledge. It increases the ocean of transcendental bliss and enables us to fully test the nectar for which we're always anxious. O my Lord, your holy name alone can render all benediction to living beings, and thus we have hundreds. But I'm so unfortunate that I have no attraction for them. Once we chant the holy name of the Lord in a humble state of mind, thinking oneself a Lord and stroll in the street, one should be more tolerant than a tree, devoid of all sense of false prestige, and should be ready to offer all respect to others. In such a state of mind, one can chant the holy name of the Lord constantly. O Almighty Lord, I have no desire to accumulate wealth, nor do I desire beautiful women, nor do I want any number of followers. I only want your casual devotional service, birth after birth. O son of Maharaj Nanda Krishna, I am your eternal servitor, yet somehow or other I have fallen in this ocean of birth and death. Please pick me up from this ocean of death and place me as one of the atoms at your lotus feet. O my Lord, when will my eyes will be decorated with tears of love flowing constantly when I chant your holy name? When will my voice choke up, and will the hairs of my body stand on end at the recitation of your name? O Govinda, feeling your separation, I am considering a moment to be like 12 years or more. Tears are flowing from my eyes like torrents of rain, and I feel all vacant in the world in your absence. I know no one but Krishna as my Lord, and it should remain so, even if it handles me roughly by his embrace, or makes me broken-hearted by not being present before me. He is completely free to do anything and everything, for he is always my worshipful Lord unconditionally. Shri 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 Tanama Prabhu Sikhastakam Ki Jai. Namo Mahavarannaya Krishna Prema Pradayati Krishna Krishna. There are 10 offenses in the matter of chanting the holy name of the Lord that should be avoided. They are as follows. 1. To blaspheme the devotees who dedicate their life for propagating the holy name of the Lord. 2. To consider names of demigods, Lord Shiva, Lord Brahma, to be equal to or independent of a name, Lord Vishnu. 3. To disobey the orders of the spiritual master. 4. To blaspheme the Vedic literature or rotten pursuits of Vedic version. 5.
To consider the glories of chanting
Hare Krishna to be imagination. 6. To give some interpretations on the holy name of the Lord. 7. To commit sinful activities in strength of chanting the holy name of the Lord. 8. To consider the chanting Hare Krishna as one of the auspicious ritualistic activities which often Vedas as fruitive activity, karma kanda. 9. To instruct the faithless person by the glories of holy name. And 10. To not have complete faith in chanting with the holy names and to maintain material attachments even after understanding so many instructions on this matter. It also an offense to be interchangeable while chanting. Every devotee who claims to be Vaishnava must carefully guard against 10 offenses in order to quickly achieve desired success. Krishna Prema. Now let us offer our most humble obeisance unto all the Vaishnavas worship the Lord. They are just our desired trees, they can fulfill the desire of everyone, and they are full of compassion for the fallen conditioned soldier.
Shri Guru Pranama prayers ki jai. Om Aganya Timirandasya Jana Salakaya Chaksurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manubhistam Sapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Tadati Swapadantikam Bandeham Shri Guru Shri Jataha Pajakamalang Shri Gurun Vaishnavamsa Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahaguna Ragunatan Vitam Tam Sajivam Saidvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahaguna Lalita Shri Vishaka Nivitam Sa Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paschatya Desatarine Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Tinamini Shri Varsavani Devi Dayitaya Kripabdaye Krishna Sambandha Vigyana Dayane Prabhave Namaha Madhur Ujjwala Premadya Shri Rupanuga Bhakti Da Shri Guru Karuna Shakti Vigrahaya Namastute Namaste Guruvani Shri Murtaye Dinatarine Rupanuga Virudapa Apisidanta Dvantaharine Namo Guru Kishoraya Shakshad Vairagya Murtaye Vit Pralambara Sambhude Padam Pujayate Namaha Namo Bhakti Vinodaya Sachitananda Namine Guru Shakti Swarupaya Rupanuga Varayate Gauravir Baba Bhumestvam Nirdesta Sajjana Priya Vaishnava Sarvabhuma Shri Jagannathaya Te Namaha Vanchakalpa Tarabhyascha Kripa Sindhuvye Vacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Padayate Krishna Krishna Chaitanya Namne Guru Chuse Namaha Panchatattvatmakam Krishnam Bhakta Rupa Swarupakam Bhakta Avataram Bhaktakam Namami Bhakta Saktikam Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopisha Gopiva Panta Radhakanta Namastate Nanjayatam Suratur Pangur Mamamanda Mater Gati Matsarva Swapadam Bojo Radha Madanan Mohano Divya Dvindaranya Kalpadumadaha Shrimad Ratnagara Simhasanasito Shrimad Radha Shila Govinda Devo Prestali Bihi Sevyamanam Smarami Shriman Rasa Rasaram Bivam Sivata Tatastita Karsan Venuswanir Gopir Gopinatakstriye Struna Tapta Kanchana Gurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanustute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasati Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Shri Guru Pranama prayers ki jai. Shri Brahma Samhita ki jai. Ishvara Parama Krishna Satchitananda Vigraha. Anadiradir Govinda Sarvakarana Karanam. Chentamani Prakara Sadmasaka Pariksha Laksavrite Susurabir Abhipaliantam. Lakshmi Sahasra Satasambhrama Sevyanmanam Govindam Adipurisham Tamaham Bhajami Venam Kvanantam Arvinda Dalayataksam Parhavatam Samasitam Buddhasundarangam Kandarpa Koti Kamaniya Visesa Sobam Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Alola Chandrakala Sadvanamalyavamsi Ratnam Gadam Pranay Keli Kalavilasam Shamam Tribanga Lalita Niyata Prakasam Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Angani Yasya Sakalendriya Vrittimanti Pasyanti Panti Kalyanti Chiram Jaganti Ananda Chinmaya Sadujvala Vigrahasya Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Advaitam Achutam Anadim Ananta Rupam Adyam Purana Purisham Navayovanam Cha Vedesa Durlabham Adurlabham Akma Bhakto Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Pantastu Koti Satavatsala Sampragamyo Vayoratapi Manaso Munipungamanam So Pyasti Yad Prabhadasimya Vichintya Tatve Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Ekopya Sora Chayitum Jagananda Kotam Yes Chaktirastis Jagananda Chayayadanta Andantarasta Paramanu Sarantarastam Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Yad Bhava Bhavita Dio Manajasta Taiva Samprapya Rupa Mahima Sanayanabusa Suktarya Meva Nigama Pratitaistuvanti Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Ananda Chinmaya Rasapati Bhavitavis Tabirya Eva Nicharupa Taya Kalabi Goloka Eva Nivasata Kilatma Bhuto Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Premanjana Churita Bhakti Vilochanena Santaksa Deva Hidayesu Vilokayanti Yam Shama Sundaram Achintya Gunaswarupam Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Ramadi Murti Sukalani Menatistan Nanavataram Akarod Bhuvanesu Kintu Krishna Swayam Samabhavat Paramam Pamamyo Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Yasya Prabha Prabhavato Jagananda Kotim Yastisva Sesa Vasadadi Vibhuti Bhinam Tad Brahma Niskalamanantam Sesa Bhutam Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Mayahi Yasya Jagadanda Satani Sute Trigunya Tad Vishaya Veda Vitaya Manam Sattva Valambi Parasatvam Visuddha Sattvam Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Ananda Chinmaya Rasatmataya Manasuya Praninam Pratifalam Smaratam Upetya Lilaya Tena Bhuvanani Jayaya Jasram Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Goloka Namni Nichitamni Tale Chitasya Devi Mahesh Haridama Sute 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 Te Prabhava Nichaya Vitascha Yena Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Shrististati Pralaya Sadhana Saktireka Chayeva Yasya Bhuvanani Vibharti Durga Ichana Rupam Apiyasya Chichestate Sa Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Kshiram Yata Dadi Vikara Visesa Yoga Sanjayate Nahitata Pritakasti Hetu Yasambutam Apitata Samapaitikaya Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Departure Dasantam Abhyapetya Dipayate Vivita Hetu Samanu Dharma Yastadvikeva Hicha Vishnu Taya Vibhati Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Yakarna Narna Vajale Bhajatisma Yoga Nidram Mananta Jagananda Saroma Kupa Adhara Saktim Avalambya Param Smarutam Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Yasyaika Nisra Sitakala Matavalambya Jivanti Loma Vilaja Jagananda Nata Vishnu Mahansa Yasya Kala Visesa Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Pasmanya Tasma Sakalesu Nijesu Teja Sriyam Kiyat Prakatayat Apitat Prataptra Brahmaya Esa Jagadanda Vidanu Karta Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Yat Pada Palava Yugam Vinidaya Kumbha Dwande Pranama Samayesa Ganadi Raja Vignan Vinantam Alamasya Chagatrayasya Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Agnir Mahiga Ganamambu Marudisasya Kalas Tatarpa Manasiti Jagatrayani Yasmad Bhavanti Vibhavanti Visanti Yamcha Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Yaschaksuresa Savita Sakila Grahanam Raja Samasta Suramurti Rasesa Teja Yasya Gaya Brahmati Sambrita Kala Chakro Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Dharmulta Papa Nichaya Sutayastapam Sri Brahma Adi Kita Patagava Tayascha Jiva Yadata Matra Vibhava Bhagadhapava Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Yastrinda Gopa Matavendra Mahosva Karma Bandhanu Rupa Falabhajana Matanoti Karmani Nita Hati Kintucha Bhakti Bhajam Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Nyam Krodha Kama Sahaja Pranayadi Biti Vatsalya Moha Guru Gaurava Sevya Bhava Sanchintya Tasya Sadrisim Tam Mahapurete Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Shriya Kanta Kanta Parama Purusha Kalpataravo Jumabu Mischintamani Ganama Itoyam Amritam Katagahanam Natyam Gamanam Apivam Sipriyasaki Chidanandam Jyoti Param Apitad Aswatyam Apichasaya Chashtiradbhi Shavati Surabhyas Jasumahan Nimesa Dakyo Vavrajati Nahiyatra Visamaya Bajay Svetadvibham Tamaham Iha Golakam Itiyam Vidantas Te Santakshiti Virachara Katipaye Ishwara Parama Krishna Sachitananda Vigraha Nadiradi Govinda Sarvakarana Karanam Shri Brahma Samhita Ki Jai. Shri Guru Pranama prayers, Ki Jai. The spiritual master is receiving benediction from the ocean of mercy, just as a cloud pours water on a forest fire to extinguish it, so the spiritual master delivers the materially afflicted world by extinguishing the blazing fire of material existence. However, my respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet is such a spiritual master who is an ocean of auspicious qualities, chanting the holy name, dancing in ecstasy, singing and playing musical instruments. The spiritual master is gladdened by the Sankirtan movement of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu because he is relishing the mellows of pure devotion with his mind. Sometimes his hair stands on end, he feels quivering in his body, and tears flow from his eyes like waves are from my respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet is such a spiritual master. The spiritual master is always engaged in the temple worship of Shri Radha and Krishna. He also engages his disciples in such worship. They dress the deities in beautiful clothes and ornaments, clean their temple, and perform other similar worship of the Lord. I offer my respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet as such a spiritual master. The spiritual master is always offering Krishna 4 kinds of delicious food, analyzes that which is leaked, chewed, drunk, and sucked. When the spiritual master sees that the devotees are satisfied by eating Bhagavat Prasada, he is satisfied. I offer my respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet of such a spiritual master. The spiritual master is always eager to hear and chant about the unlimited conjugal pastimes of Radhika and Madhava and their qualities, names, and forms. The spiritual master aspires to relish these at every moment. I offer my respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet of such a spiritual master. The spiritual master is very dear because he is expert at assisting gopis who at different times make different tasteful arrangements for the perfection of Radha and Krishna's conjugal loving affairs within the groves of Vrindavan. I offer my most respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet of such a spiritual master. The spiritual master is to be honored as much as the Supreme Lord because he is the most confidential servant to the Lord. This is acknowledged in all revealed scriptures and followed by all authorities. Therefore, I offer my respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet of such a spiritual master who is a bona fide representative of Sri Hare Krishna. By the mercy of the spiritual master, one receives the benediction of Krishna. Without the grace of the spiritual master, one cannot make any advancement. Therefore, I should always remember and praise the spiritual master at least 3 times a day, as for my respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet of my spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Gaur Premanandi Haribol. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 10, verse number 45. Amuni Bhagavat Rupe Mayate Hi Anuswarnite Ube Api Nagrinanti Mayashriste Vipaschitaha. Amuni, all these, Bhagavat, unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Rupe, in the forms, Maya, by me, Te, unto you, He, certainly, Anuvarnite, described respectively, Ube, both, Api, also, Na, never, Grinanti, accepts, Maya, external, Shiste, being so manifested, Vipachitaha, the learned one who knows. Translation by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Neither of the above forms of the Lord, as just described unto you from the material angle of vision, is accepted by the pure devotees of the Lord who know Him well. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. The impersonalists think of the absolute personality of Godhead in two different ways, as above mentioned. On the one hand, they worship the Lord in his Vishwarupa, or all-pervading universal form. And on the other, they think of the Lord's unmanifested, indescribable, subtle form. The theories of pantheism and monism are respectively applicable to these two conceptions of the Supreme as gross and subtle. But both of them are rejected by the learned pure devotees of the Lord because they are aware of the factual position. This is very clearly mentioned in the 11th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, which records Arjuna's experience of the Vishwarupa of the Supreme Lord Sri Krishna. Adrishta purvam hrisitosmi dristva bhayena cha pravyatitam mano me tad eva me darshaya deva rupam prasiddha devasa jagannivasa. Srimad Bhagavad Gita, 11th chapter, 45th verse. Arjuna, as a pure devotee of the Lord, never previously saw the contemplated universal form of the Lord, Vishwarupa. But when he did see it, his curiosities were satisfied. But he was not happy to see such a form of the Lord because of his attachment as a pure devotee. He was afraid to see the gigantic form of the Lord. He therefore prayed to the Lord to assume his four-handed Narayana or Krishna form, which alone could please Arjuna. Undoubtedly, the Lord has the supreme potency to exhibit himself in multifarious forms, but the pure devotees of the Lord are interested in his forms as eternally exhibited in the abode of the Lord, known as the Tripad Vibhuti or Kingdom of God. The Lord in the Tripad Vibhuti abode exhibits himself in two forms, either with four hands or with two hands. The Vishwarupa exhibited in the material manifestation has unlimited hands and unlimited dimensions, with everything unlimited. The pure devotees of the Lord worship him in his Vaikuntha forms as Narayana or Krishna. Sometimes the same Vaikuntha forms of the Lord are in the material world also, by his grace, as Sri Rama, Sri Krishna, and Sri Narasingha Deva, etc. And thus, the pure devotees also worship them. Usually, the features shown in the material world have no existence in the Vaikuntha planets, and thus they are not accepted by the pure devotees. What the pure devotees worship from the very beginning are eternal forms of the Lord existing in the Vaikuntha planets. The non-devotee impersonalists imagine the material forms of the Lord, and ultimately they merge into the impersonal Brahmajyoti of the Lord, whereas the pure devotees of the Lord are worshippers of the Lord both in the beginning and also in the perfect stage of salvation eternally. The worship of the pure devotee never stops, whereas the worship of the impersonalist stops after his attainment of salvation, when he merges in the impersonal form of the Lord known as the Brahmajyoti. Therefore, the pure devotees of the Lord are described here as vipassita, or learned who are in knowledge of the Lord perfectly. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Neither of the above forms of the Lord, as just described unto you, from the material angle of vision, is accepted by the pure devotees of the Lord who know him well. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. So, in the previous verse, it said, therefore, beyond this gross manifestation is a transcendental manifestation finer than the finest form. It has no beginning, no intermediate stage, and no end. Therefore, it is beyond the limits of expression or mental speculation, and is distinct from the material conception. So that's extremely important verse because it differentiates very, very, emphatically between the material world and the spiritual world. And in the spiritual world, there's no beginning, no middle, and no end. there's the eternal present. And it's very hard for anyone to imagine such a thing, such as the eternal present, where nothing gets used or exhausted, where everything is eternally full of transcendental happiness and love. And time is not a destroyer, it's a sustainer. In the material world, we experience time as a destroyer. As time goes on, things are destroyed. And ultimately, this body is going to be destroyed over time. And not only that, even worse, we get old and sick and full of anxiety and fear. So that is the pavarga. Pa means working hard. It also comes from parishrama. And then pa means you work so hard that you foam at the mouth. So the example is given horses. When they're overworked, they begin to foam at the mouth. Even the cows are like that to a certain degree. And you work so hard that not only you're exhausted, but you actually foam at the mouth. And then there's ba, which means disappointment. And then baha, which means fear. And then ma, which is death. So this is the history of almost everybody in the world. They experience hard work to make money and then to engage in sense gratification. And sometimes they get exhausted. They have to take vacations to recuperate. And even that doesn't really recuperate the anxiety. And then there is disappointment, fear, and death. So the apavarga is the process of liberation, where one does not work hard physically and mentally, and one it gets energy rather than foaming at the mouth with exhaustion, and one is not disappointed at all, because when one is working only for the pleasure of Krishna, every desire of such a person to please Krishna is satisfied. And because one is not committing any sinful activities, and because one has self-control and controls their speech, their thoughts, their actions, people are very satisfied with such a person. And that just encourages the person to be even better in their goodness and transcendental goodness. And then, so there's no disappointment, and then there's no fear, because they have full faith in the protection of Krishna. And there's no death. One lives eternally without old age, without disease, without anxiety, without fear, and so forth. So the apavarga is a path of liberation, and the pavarga is the path of constant trouble and birth and rebirth, going over and over again the same miseries. Pa, pa, ba, ba, ma. Okay, so anything that has a beginning, a middle, and an end is called material. And anything that doesn't have those things is spiritual. So the material world, it begins from Lord Krishna, and thus the form of the Lord before beginning of the material world is certainly transcendental to the finest or the finer material conception. So the difference between the material conception and the spiritual conception is very important to understand. And that's been explained already. in previous classes. But the more important thing than that is to understand the laws of material nature. Because without understanding the laws of material nature, one will unwittingly commit sinful activities. And people don't really know, or we don't really know, what's waiting for a sinful person. So the same thing as in Christianity. You have Dante's Inferno. You can look that up. So Dante wrote, he was an Italian, and he was a spiritualist of some kind, and he wrote what happens to people when they go to hell. And it's very frightening. You see that? What's it say? What's it say?
So it says Inferno is the first part of the Italian writer Dante's 14th century epic poem Divine Comedy.
Yes, the title of his book was Divine Comedy, but the first part of it is called Inferno, hell. Inferno, if you look at the word in inferno means fire.
Fire, yes.
Right. So people are burning, but you're gonna understand they don't die. They go up to the point of death, but they don't die. So that they're just suffering all the time, feeling their bodies, flesh burning, and it's unbelievable pain. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, it says the Inferno describes Dante's journey through hell, guided by the ancient Roman poet Virgil. In the poem, hell is depicted as 9 concentric circles of torment located within the earth. It is the realm of those who have rejected spiritual values by yielding to bestial appetites or violence, or
because they were living very sinfully, and they had these bestial appetites, meaning they had very gross, horrible desires, and they engaged in gross, horrible activity during their lifetime. Go ahead.
or by perverting their human intellect to fraud or malice against their fellow men.
Yeah, so they caused a lot of suffering to other people. Okay, so this is described also in the 30th chapter of the 3rd canto, and it's described by Kapila Deva as the results of sin. Now, I'm not going to read everything. I'm just going to read some parts of it. And it says, the foolish family man does not become averse to family life, although he is maintained by those whom he once maintained. Deformed by the influence of old age, he prepares himself to meet ultimate death. Purport. Family attraction is so strong that even if a person is neglected by family members in his old age, he cannot give up family affection, and he remains at home just like a dog. In the Vedic way of life, it is advised that before getting too weak and being baffled in material activities, and before becoming diseased, one should give up family life and engage oneself completely in the service of the Lord for the remaining days of his life. Therefore, the Vedic scriptures enjoin that as soon as one passes 50 years of age, he must give up family life and live alone in the forest. After preparing himself fully, he should become a sannyasi, travel widely, and distribute the knowledge of spiritual life to each and every home. Thus, he remains at home just like a pet dog. It's the next verse. If they don't follow the Vedic path, he remains at home just like a pet dog and eats whatever is so negligently given to him. Afflicted with many illnesses such as dyspepsia and loss of appetite, he eats only very small morsels of food, and he becomes an invalid who cannot work anymore. Most people die of malnutrition. You say, what? In America? Malnutrition? I mean, you can eat as much as you want here. No. Actually, a person who's on the track of dying loses their appetite. They don't want to eat because eating just causes them more pain. So, before meeting death, a man is sure to become a diseased invalid. And when he is neglected by his family members, his life becomes less than a dog's because he is put into so many miserable conditions. Vedic literatures enjoin, therefore, that before the arrival of such miserable conditions, a man should leave home and die without the knowledge of his family members. If a man leaves home and dies without his family's knowing, that is considered a glorious death. Wow. But an attached family man wants his family members to carry him in a great procession even after his death, and although he will not be able to see how the procession goes, he still desires that his body be taken gorgeously in procession. Thus he is happy without even knowing where he has to go when he leaves his body for the next life. Next verse. In that diseased condition, a man's eyes bulge due to the pressure of air from within, and his glands become congested with mucus. He has difficulty breathing, and upon exhaling and inhaling, he produces a sound like gura gura, a rattling within the throat. In that way, he comes under the clutches of death and lies down, surrounded by lamenting friends and relatives, and although he wants to speak with them, he no longer can because he is under the control of time. Purport. For formality's sake, when a man is lying on his deathbed, his relatives come to him, and sometimes they cry very loudly, addressing the dying man, "Oh, my father, oh, my friend," or "Oh, my husband." In that pitiable condition, the dying man wants to speak with them and instruct them of his desires, but because he is fully under the control of the time factor, or death, he cannot express himself, and that causes him inconceivable pain. He is already in a painful condition because of disease, and his glands and throat are choked up with mucus. He is already in a very difficult position, and when he is addressed by his relatives in that way, his grief increases. Next verse. Thus, the man who engaged with uncontrolled senses in maintaining his family dies in great grief, seeing his relatives crying. He dies most pathetically in great pain and without consciousness. Purport. In the Bhagavad Gita it is said that at the time of death, one will be absorbed in the thoughts, and in the thoughts he cultivated during his lifetime. A person who has no idea other than to properly maintain his family members must have family affairs in his last thoughts. That is the natural sequence for a common man. The common man does not know the destiny of his life. He is simply busy in his present flash of life, maintaining his family. At the last stage, no one is satisfied with how he has improved the family's economic condition. Everyone thinks that he could not provide sufficiently. Because of his deep family affection, he forgets his main duty of controlling his senses and improving his spiritual consciousness. Sometimes a dying man entrusts the family affairs to either his son or some relatives, saying, "I am going, please look after the family." He does not know where he is going, but even at the time of death, he is anxious about how his family will be maintained. Sometimes it is seen that a dying man requests the physician to increase his life, at least for a few years, so that the family maintenance plan, which he has begun, can be completed. These are the material diseases of the conditioned soul. He completely forgets his real engagement to become Krishna conscious and is always serious about planning to maintain his family, although he changes families one after another. next text, next verse. At death, he sees the messengers of the Lord of death come before him, their eyes full of wrath, and in great fear he passes stool and urine. I've seen that personally. Purport. There are two kinds of transmigration of a living entity after passing away from the present body. One kind of transmigration is to go to the controller of sinful activities, that's Yamaraj, who is known as Yamaraja. And the other is to go to the higher planets, up to Vaikuntha. Here, Lord Krishna describes how persons engaged in activities of sense gratification to maintain a family are treated by the messengers of Yamaraja called Yamadutas. At the time of death, the Yamadutas become the custodians of those persons who have strongly gratified their senses. They take charge of the dying man and take him to the planet where Yamaraj resides. The conditions there are described in the following verses. Next verse. As a criminal is arrested for punishment by the constables of the state, a person engaged in criminal sense gratification is similarly arrested by the Yamadutas, who bind him by the neck with a strong rope and cover his subtle body so that he may undergo severe punishment. Wow. So he's saying here that a person engaged in criminal sense gratification is arrested by the Yamadutas, who bind him by the neck with a strong rope and cover his subtle body so that he may undergo severe punishment. It's unbelievable what it's saying here. Criminal sense gratification. And cover his subtle body so that he may undergo. Well, they don't want the subtle body to separate from the gross body, because the subtle body can only feel anxiety and fear, but they want okay, let's go on. It says, purport, every living entity is covered by a subtle body and a gross body. The subtle body is the covering of mind, ego, intelligence, and consciousness. It is said in the scriptures that the constables of Yamaraj cover the subtle body of the culprit and take him to the abode of Yamaraj to be punished in a way that he is able to tolerate. He does not die from this punishment, because if he died, then who would suffer the punishment? It is not the business of the constables of Yamaraj to put one to death. In fact, it is not possible to kill a living entity because factually he is eternal. He simply has to suffer the consequences of his activities of sense gratification. The process of punishment is explained in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. Formerly, the king's men would take a criminal in a boat in the middle of the river. They would dunk him by grasping a bunch of his hair and thrusting him completely underwater. And when he was almost suffocated, the king's constables would take him out of the water and allow him to breathe for some time. And then they would again dunk him in the water to suffocate. This sort of punishment is inflicted upon the forgotten soul by Yamaraja, as will be described in the following verses. So that's called waterboarding. Right? It's the different ways of doing it, but it's the same thing. You force someone to put their head underwater, and then they start gasping for air, and they start drinking, and some of the water goes in their throat, and they can't talk, they can't breathe, and then before they die, they pull them up, and then they put them back again. So it's extremely, extremely painful and causes great distress and anxiety, especially when you're gasping for air. So, in other words, it's the subtle body, the gross body dies, and the subtle body is kept intact so that they can suffer. While carried by the constables of Yamaraj, this is the next verse, he is overwhelmed and trembles in their hands. While passing on the road, he is bitten by dogs and he can remember the sinful activities of his life, he is thus terribly distressed. Purport. It appears from this verse that while passing from this planet to the planet of Yamaraj, the culprit arrested by Yamaraj's constables meets many dogs which bark and bite just to remind him of his criminal activities of sense gratification. It is said in the Bhagavad Gita that one becomes almost blind and is bereft of all sense when he is infuriated by the desire for sense gratification. He forgets everything. A man is bereft of all intelligence when he is too attracted by sense gratification, and he forgets that he has to suffer. He has to suffer the consequences also. Here, the chance for recounting his activities of sense gratification is given by the dogs engaged by Yamaraja. While we live in the gross body, such activities of sense gratification are encouraged, even by modern governments. In many states all over the world, the government encourages such activities by pushing birth control. Women are supplied pills, and they are allowed to go to a clinical laboratory to get assistance for abortions. This is going on as a result of sense gratification. Actually, sex is meant for begetting a good child, but because people have no control over the senses, and there is no institution to train them to control the senses, the poor people fall victim to the criminal offenses of sense gratification, and they are punished after death, as described in these passages of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Wow. Try and convince someone of this. So you can see even the Christians, they have this, they have more information about hell than they do about the spiritual world. You know. So Dante wrote this, is a divine comedy. He calls it a divine comedy. That right there is very, what you would call cynical. What's so funny about it? The divine comedy, you think, oh, this is going to be something interesting to read. You read it, it's all this horrible stuff. Under the scorching sun, the criminal has to pass through roads of hot sand with forest fires on both sides. He is whipped on the back by the constables because of his inability to walk, and he is afflicted by hunger and thirst. But unfortunately, there is no drinking water, no shelter, and no place for rest on the road. While passing on that road to the abode of Yamaraja, he falls down in fatigue and sometimes becomes unconscious, but he is forced to rise again. In this way, he is very quickly brought to the presence of Yamaraj. Thus, he has to pass 99,000 yojanas. One yojana is about 8 miles. Within 2 to 3 moments, and then he is at once engaged in the tortuous punishment he is destined to suffer. This is on his way to hell. He's already suffering untold and unimaginable suffering. 1 yojana is 8 miles, and thus he has to pass along a road that is much as 792,000 miles long. Such a long distance is passed over within a few moments only. The subtle body is covered by the constables so that the living entity can travel such a long distance quickly and at the same time tolerate the suffering. This covering, although material, is of such fine elements that material scientists cannot discover what the coverings are made of. To pass 720,000 years or miles within a few moments seems wonderful to the modern space travelers. They have so far traveled at a speed of 18,000 miles per hour, but here we see that a criminal passes 792,000 miles within a few seconds only, although the process is not spiritual but material. So there's much more advanced material experiences that people just don't realize. Okay, what time is it now? 6:50. Oh, it's not 7. Okay. Next verse. He is placed in the midst of burning pieces of wood, and his limbs are set on fire. In such cases, he is made to eat his own flesh or have it eaten by others. So although it's the subtle body, it seems as if the concept of the body, either it's in his mind or it's actually factual, that the body is still there, although he's dead. But he's still sensitive. He still can feel things. This verse and the next 3 verses describes the sinful living entity's punishment. The first description is that the criminal has to eat his own flesh burning with fire. Wow. Or allow others like himself, who are present there, to eat it. In the last Great War, people in concentration camps sometimes ate their own stool, so there is no wonder that in Yamasadana, the abode of Yamaraja, a meat eater who has a very enjoyable life eating others' flesh has to eat his own flesh. Wow. Next verse. His entails, that means his intestines, are pulled out by the hounds and vultures of hell, even though he is still alive to see it. And he is subjected to torment by serpents, scorpions, gnats, and other creatures that bite him. His limbs are lopped off and torn asunder by elephants. He is hurled down from hilltops, and he is also held captive either in water or in a cave. Men and women whose lives were built upon indulgence in illicit sex are put into many kinds of miserable conditions in the hells known as Tamishra, Anda Tamishra, and Raurava. The lives of all materialistic people who are undergoing severe tribulation in a struggle for existence are based on sex. Therefore, in the Vedic civilization, sex is allowed only in a restricted way. It is for the married couple and only for begetting children. But when sex is indulged in for sense gratification, illegally and illicitly, both the man and the woman await severe punishment in this world or after death. In this world, they are punished by virulent diseases like syphilis and gonorrhea, and in the next life, as we see in this passage of the Srimad Bhagavatam, they are put into various kinds of hellish conditions to suffer. In the Bhagavad Gita, 1st chapter, illicit sex is also very much condemned, and it is said that one who produced children by illicit sex is sent to hell. It is confirmed here in the Bhagavatam that such offenders are put into hellish conditions of life in Tamishra, under Tamishra, and Raurava. Those are different parts of hell. Next text. Lord Kapila continued, "My dear mother, it is sometimes said that we experience hell or heaven on this planet, for hellish punishments are sometimes visible on this planet also." Well, that's going on now in Ukraine and other places. Purport. Sometimes unbelievers do not accept these statements of Scripture regarding hell. Lord Kapila therefore confirms them by saying that these hellish conditions are also visible on this planet. It is not that they are only on the planet where Yamaraj lives. On the planet of Yamaraj, the sinful man is given a chance to practice living in the hellish conditions that he will have to endure in the next life. And then he is given a chance to take birth on another planet to continue his hellish life. For example, if a man is to be punished to remain in hell and eat stool and urine, then first of all he practices such habits on the planet of Yamaraj, and then he is given a particular type of body, that of a hog, so that he can eat stool and think he is enjoying life. It is stated previously that in any hellish condition, the conditioned soul thinks he is happy. Otherwise, it would not be possible for him to suffer hellish life. Next text. After leaving this body, the man who maintained himself and his family members by sinful activities suffers a hellish life, and his relatives suffer also. Purport. The mistake of modern civilization is that man does not believe in the next life. But whether he believes or not, the next life, there will in the next life. But whether he believes or not, the next life is there, and one has to suffer if one does not lead a responsible life in terms of the injunctions of authoritative scriptures like the Vedas and the Puranas. Species lower than human beings are not responsible for their actions because they are made to act in a certain way. But in the developed life of human consciousness, one who does not act responsibly is sure to get a hellish life as described herein. Next verse. He goes alone to the darkest regions of hell after quitting the present body, and the money he acquired by envying other living entities is the passage money with which he leaves this world. When a man earns money, purport, when a man earns money by unfair means and maintains his family and himself with that money, the money is enjoyed by many members of the family, but he alone goes to hell and suffers there. Suffers the resultant sinful reactions accrued from such a violent and illicit life. For example, if a man secures some money by killing someone, and with that money maintains his family, those who enjoy the black money earned by him are also partially responsible and also sent to hell. But he who is the leader is especially punished. The money he earned is left in this world, and he takes only the sinful reactions. Okay. So then it says, in this world also, if a person acquires some money by murdering someone, the family is not hanged, although its members are sinfully contaminated. But the man who commits the murder and maintains his family is himself hanged as a murderer. The direct offender is more responsible for sinful activities than the indirect enjoyer. The great learned scholar Chanakya Pandita says, therefore, that whatever one has in his possession had better be spent for the cause of Sat, or the Supreme Personality of Godhead, because one cannot take his possessions with him. They remain here, and they will be lost. Either we leave the money or the money leaves us, but we will be separated. The best use of money, as long as it is within our possession, is to spend it to accrue and propagate Krishna consciousness. Hari Bol. Okay, so we'll stop right there. This is, well, actually no, we're almost at the end. Let's finish it. Thus, text 32. Thus, by the arrangement of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the maintainer of kinsmen is put into a hellish condition to suffer for his sinful activities, like a man who has lost his wealth. Purport. And that's the worst thing. To have money and then to lose it drives people crazy. Actually, the devotee voluntarily gives away his money. That's different than losing it. So he doesn't regret it if he gives it away to promote Krishna consciousness, to help others. The example set in herein, so that's after he has taken care of his family and make sure that they have enough money to live on after he leaves. And then he goes with a clear consciousness of having accomplished his duty. And obviously, because his desire is pure, Krishna helps. Even though it seems impossible, but it becomes possible because of Krishna's help. The example set in herein is that the sinful person suffers just like a man who has lost his wealth. The human form of body is achieved by the conditioned soul after many, many births, and is a very valuable asset. Instead of utilizing this life to get liberation, if one uses it simply for the purpose of maintaining his so-called family, and therefore performs foolish and unauthorized action, he is compared to a man who has lost his wealth and who, upon losing it, laments. When wealth is lost, there's no use lamenting. But as long as there is wealth, one has to utilize it properly and thereby gain eternal profit. it may be argued that when a man leaves his money earned by sinful activities, he also leaves the sinful activities here earned by sinful actions. He also leaves his sinful activities here with his money. But it is especially mentioned herein that by superior arrangement, although the man leaves behind his sinfully earned money, he carries the effect of it. Wow. When a man steals some money, if he is caught and agrees to return it, he is not freed from the criminal punishment. By the law of the state, even though he returns the money, he has to undergo the punishment. Similarly, the money earned by a criminal process may be left by the man when dying, but by superior arrangement, he carries with him the effect, and therefore he has to suffer hellish life. Therefore, a person who is very eager to maintain his family and kinsmen simply by black methods certainly goes to the darkest region of hell, which is known as under Tamishar. Purport. 3 words in this verse are very significant. Kevolena means only by black methods. Adharmena means unrighteous or irreligious. And Kutumba Bharana means family maintenance. Maintaining one's family is certainly a duty of a householder, but one should be eager to earn his livelihood by the prescribed method, as stated in the scriptures. In the Bhagavad Gita, it is described that the Lord has divided the social system into 4 classifications of castes, or varnas, according to quality and work. Apart from the Bhagavad Gita, in every society, a man is known according to his quality and work. For example, when a man earns his livelihood constructing wooden furniture, he is called a carpenter, and a man who works with an anvil and iron is called a blacksmith. Similarly, a man who is engaged in the medical or engineering fields has a particular duty and designation. All these human activities have been divided by the Supreme Lord into 4 varnas, namely the Brahmanas, intellectuals and priests, the Kshatriyas, warriors and administrators, the Vaishyas, merchants and farmers, and Sudras, manual laborers. In the Bhagavad Gita and other Vedic scriptures, the specific duties of the Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Sudras are mentioned. One should work honestly according to his qualification. He should not earn his livelihood unfairly or in a way for which he is not qualified. If someone claims to be a Brahmana and works as a priest, attracting people who expect to be enlightened about the spiritual way of life, but he is not qualified as a priest, then he is cheating the public. One should not earn one's livelihood by such unfair means. The same is applicable to a Kshatriya and a Vaishnava. It is especially mentioned that the means of livelihood of those who are, the means of livelihood here is mentioned that he who earns his livelihood by unfair means, kevolena, is sent to the darkest hellish region. Otherwise, if one maintains his family by prescribed methods and honest means, there is no objection to one's being a family man. Having gone, in the text 34, having gone through all the miserable hellish conditions and having passed in a regular order through the lowest forms of animal life prior to human birth, and having thus been purged of one's sins, one is reborn again as a human being on this earth. Just look at what you have to go through to get back to the human form of life. It's unbelievable. Just as a prisoner who has undergone troublesome prison life is set free again, the person who has always engaged in impious and mischievous activities is put into hellish conditions, and when he has undergone different hellish lives, namely those of lower animals like cats, dogs, and hogs, by the gradual process of evolution, he again comes back as a human being. In the Bhagavad Gita, it is stated that even though a person engaged in the practice of the yoga system may not finish perfectly and may fall down for some reason or other, his next life as a human being is guaranteed. It is stated that such a person who has fallen from the path of yoga practice is given a chance in his next life to take birth in a very rich family or a very pious family, it is interpreted that rich family refers to a big mercantile family because generally people who engage in business are very rich. One who engaged in the process of self-realization or connecting with the Supreme Absolute Truth but fell short is allowed to take birth in such a rich family, or he is allowed to take birth in the family of pious brahmanas. Either way, he is guaranteed an appearance in human society in his next life. It can be concluded that if someone is not willing to enter into hellish life, as in Tamishra or under Tamishra, then he must take to the process of Krishna consciousness, which is the first-class yoga system, because even if one is unable to attain complete Krishna consciousness in this life, he is guaranteed at least to take his next birth in a human family. He cannot be sent into hellish condition. Krishna is the purest life, and it protects all human beings from gliding down to hell to take birth in a family. No. Krishna consciousness is the purest life, and it protects all human beings from gliding down to hell to take birth in a family of dogs or hogs. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. So you see how everything is in the Srimad Bhagavatam. What happens to a good person, what happens to a bad person, and what happens to a pure devotee, and what happens to people who are not pure devotees, but who are engaged in some kind of spiritual activity. So everything is explained. And therefore we should hear everything and meditate on it so that we don't go the wrong path. Any questions?
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj. Maharaj, in text 19,
Yes.
At the death, he sees the messengers of the Lord of death come before him, and their eyes full of wrath and in great fear.
Eyes full of wrath.
Wrath.
Meaning anger.
Eyes full of wrath, and in great fear he passes stool and urine.
Yes.
My question is, if someone is leaving the body like this, so what we can do for that person after he leaves the body?
You offer him Mahaprasadam through the Shraddha ceremony. That's a lot better than, eating his own flesh, burning, right?
Okay.
The Shraddha ceremony is very important.
Okay.
And you can do it every day, actually. You offer your food to Krishna and offer it to your family members passed on. Okay.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Haribol. Glorious to Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Yeah, material life is serious. We should use it only in Krishna's, this body, you should use it only in Krishna's service. Otherwise, look what happens. It's unbelievable. Okay. Maybe I'll chant. Oh, it's okay. I'll do this. This is Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Shri Guru Charana Padma Kevala Bhakati Sadma Bando Mui Savadanama Te Bando mui savadana te. Janara prasade bhai he bhavatoriya jai. Krishna prapti hoya hoite. Krishna prapti hoya hoite. Guru Mukha Padma Vaikya Chitte Koriya. Guru Mukha Padma Vaikya Chitte Koriya. Arana Koriya Mane Asa. Arana Koriya Mane Asa. Shri Guru Charane Rati Aise Uttamagati. Guru Charane Rati Aise Uttamagati. Ye prasade pure sarva asa. Ye prasade pure sarva sa. Chakshudana dila je janme Prabhu se. Prema bhakti Chakshudana dila je janme Prabhu se. Divya Gyan de Prakashito. Prema Bhakti ja hoite avidya Yamina Sahajate Vedega Janaracharito Shiguru Karuna Sindhu Adana Janara Bandhu Shri Guru Karuna Sindhu Adana Janara Bandhu Lokenat Lokera Jivana Lokenat Lokera Jivana Ha Prabhu Kura Doya Deha Mori Pada Jaya Ha Prabhu Kura Doya Deha Mori Pada Jaya Ha Prabhu Kura Doya Deha Mori Pada Jaya Ebeyas Gusakji Bhuvana Ebeyas Gusakji Bhuvana Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Hari Bol, Hari Bol. Hari Bol Nitai Gaur, Hari Bol Nitai Gaur. Jai Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Pararajacha Statara Satara Shishi Shimari's Divine Grace. A.C. Bhaktivedanta Goswami Maharaj, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Anantakoti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur. Prem Sikaho Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar. Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopinath Sham Kunda Radha Kundi Lira Vardhan Ki Jai. Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Shri Mayapura Dham Ki Jai. Shri Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Jai. Tulasi Devi Ki Jai. Bhakti Devi Ki Jai. Ganga Maya Ki Jai, Jamuna Maya Ki Jai, Samveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai, Nitai Gaura Premanandi. All glories to Samudra, all glories to Samudra, all glories to Samudra, all glories to Shiguru and Shiguranga, all glories to Srila Prabhupada, Patita Bhavani Ki Jai. the lotus feet of a spiritual master, the only way by which we can attain the pure devotional service. I bow down to his lotus feet with great awe and reverence. By his grace, one can cross the ocean of material suffering and obtain the mercy of Krishna. My only wish is to have my consciousness purified by the words emanating from his lotus mouth. Attachment to his lotus feet is the perfection that fulfills all desires. He opens my darkened eyes and fills my heart with transcendental knowledge. He is my Lord, birth after birth. From him ecstatic prema emanates. By him ignorance is destroyed. The Vedic scriptures sing of his character. Our spiritual master is the ocean of mercy, the friend of the poor, and Lord and master of devotees. O Master, be merciful unto us. Give us the shade of your lotus feet. Your fame is spread throughout all the three worlds. We take shelter of your lotus feet. Srila Prabhupada, Patita Bhavani Ki Jai. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Vastaya Putri Srimati Bhakti. Namaste Saraswati Devi Guruvani Chani Visesis Animat Paskatya Sattva.